All right, so today we're diving into Connie Riker's The Female Supremacy Manifesto.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and I know that title might sound a little jarring, especially for, well, this audience.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But trust me on this one. This deep dive is all about uncovering some hidden truths. You know, those power dynamics that often get swept under the rug.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Riker, she calls herself a woke cultural Marxist.
Hmm.
She goes way beyond just arguing for equality, though.
Oh.
She's making a case for full-on female supremacy.
Whoa, okay, so we're really flipping the script here.
Exactly. We're going to explore what a world designed by and for women would actually look like.
Well, I'm ready to have my assumptions challenged.
So one of the first things Riker tackles is this idea of female suppression throughout history.
Okay.
And she argues that it wasn't just some random thing that happened.
Right.
It was deliberate and systematic.
Yeah.
Like it's woven into our institutions, from private property to even the way science has been used to portray women.
I see. So it's like this underlying structure that's been there all along.
That's exactly what she's getting at.
Interesting.
And she uses some pretty powerful examples to back this up. Like, she talks about foot binding in China.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this practice that literally restricted women's movement, made them dependent on men.
Yeah.
And she points out it wasn't just about beauty standards.
Right.
It was a way to control their bodies and, by extension, their freedom.
It's about power, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Control.
And it doesn't stop there. She brings up how science, even science, has been used to portray women as inherently inferior.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean, like the whole smaller brains thing.
Exactly. Or the debate around the discovery of the female orgasm.
Yeah, like women's experiences and bodies were just completely misunderstood or misrepresented.
And she argues that all of that, it was part of this larger narrative, one that's designed to reinforce male dominance.
It makes you think about how much of what we believe is actually based on objective truth versus, these narratives that have been passed down through generations.
Right. And that's where I think it gets really interesting, especially from, well, a red pill perspective.
Yeah, I'm curious where this is going.
Because Riker, she uses this term, cultural Marxism,
Oh, okay.
to describe how these power dynamics actually work.
And that's a term that gets thrown around a lot these days, often in a very different context.
Exactly right. Like in many circles, it's used as this kind of catch-all term.
Yeah, for anything that's perceived as threatening traditional values or whatever.
Exactly.
But Riker, she's using it in a more academic sense, I'm guessing?
Right. She's drawing on the Frankfurt School and their analysis of, well,
like how cultural norms and institutions can actually perpetuate inequalities.
It's it.
Okay, so she's not using it as like a boogeyman like you see so often.
Nope.
She's using it as a framework for understanding these systems.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is where she makes this connection that might surprise you. She argues that this understanding of cultural Marxism can be a tool for women.
Huh. A tool how?
To recognize and dismantle these structures, these oppressive structures.
I'm listening.
She believes that by understanding how these systems work, women gain the awareness to challenge them.
So it's about knowledge, awareness as a form of empowerment.
Right. It's about taking control of the narratives,
Right.
recognizing how they've been marginalized, and then working to change those dynamics.
I see. So it's not about simply reversing the roles, right?
No, she's not advocating for that.
It's more nuanced.
Exactly. She's advocating for something much more nuanced.
Okay, I'm interested to see how she develops this.
And this leads us to this really important concept, intersectionality.
Intersectionality, right.
And Riker, she criticizes what she calls, quote, white feminism. She argues that it often fails to consider the diverse experiences of women based on race, class, sexual orientation, all of it.
So it's not just about gender, it's about understanding how all these other factors intersect.
Exactly. She emphasizes that it's not enough to just focus on gender.
Right?
We have to look at how all these different aspects of a woman's identity,
Yeah, her race, her socioeconomic status, her sexual orientation.
all of that intersect.
Right, to create these unique challenges.
Exactly. And she gives the example of the pay gap,
Oh, yeah, of course.
highlighting how the wage difference between white women and women of color is significant.
Yeah, and that's something that often gets overlooked in those broader conversations about gender equality.
It does. And this is where I think there's potential for a really interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Especially, well, you know,
In the context of the red pill community.
right, how can we as men be more aware of these intersectional challenges that women face?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
And it's one that requires a willingness to listen, to learn, and to challenge our own assumptions about the world.
Yeah, and to really see the world from their perspective, even if it challenges our own assumptions.
Right. It's about empathy and understanding.
And that leads us to the hashtag #MeToo movement,
Okay.
which Riker highlights as this really pivotal moment,
Yeah.
where women's voices challenged the culture of silence around sexual abuse.
Yeah, that was definitely a turning point in a lot of ways.
It was. But she also points out that the male gaze still very much influences how these stories are told and received.
Mm. So even within a movement that's supposed to empower women, there's still this tendency to frame things from a male perspective.
That's what she's arguing, yeah.
Wow, that's a really important point.
And so the question becomes, how do we ensure that men are genuinely listening and learning from women's experiences?
Right, without derailing the conversation or dominating it.
Exactly. And I think that's a crucial question, especially for those of us who are, trying to understand all these complexities of gender dynamics.
It is. It's a question that requires a lot of self-reflection and a willingness to step outside of our own comfort zones. I think it starts with really listening, you know?
Like really.
Yeah. Seeking to understand rather than, just jumping in with solutions or dismissing experiences.
Right. Putting aside our own preconceived notions.
Yeah, and trying to see things from a different perspective.
And this actually leads us to another area where Riker challenges traditional gender roles.
Okay.
Emotional labor.
Emotional labor, right? That's been a hot topic lately.
It has. But she takes it a step further.
Oh.
How so? She argues that this unequal distribution of emotional labor, well, it's a key part of how patriarchy keeps its power.
I'm listening.
So she's not just talking about,
Like who does the dishes or changes diapers, the typical stuff.
Right, exactly. It's about that mental and emotional burden
Yeah.
that often falls disproportionately on women in relationships.
Yeah, I can see that.
Think about it. Who's usually the one keeping track of birthdays, planning those social events, remembering to buy groceries, mediating all that?
Oh, yeah, it's usually the woman, isn't it?
It often is.
Keeping everyone on track and everything running smoothly.
And that expectation to be the emotional caretaker, it's, well,
Exhausting.
it can be incredibly draining. And she calls this out as a form of invisible labor. But it goes unacknowledged, undervalued.
Do you think it's just expected, part of the woman's role?
Exactly. And she makes this really interesting connection. She ties this back to those traditional notions of masculinity.
Okay, yeah.
She argues that men are often socialized to, well,
suppress their emotions.
right, be stoic and strong.
Yeah. The whole boys don't cry thing.
Exactly. And that makes it harder to really participate in this emotional labor.
Because they haven't been taught how to even process those emotions, let alone manage them in a relationship.
It's a good point, isn't it? So it's
Yeah.
not just about men doing more housework.
Right.
It's about a fundamental shift in how we view emotional intelligence.
Yeah. Valuing it, nurturing it in everyone.
And she gives this example of the Ayarka people,
The Ayaka people.
where fathers are super involved in nurturing and caring for children. It's like the norm there.
It makes you wonder, what if we raised our sons with that same expectation?
It's a really interesting thought experiment.
It is. What if those qualities were considered essential for everyone, not just women?
Right. And that kind of leads us to one of the most, I don't know, maybe controversial parts of her manifesto.
Okay, lay it on me.
Redefining masculinity.
Wow. Okay, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty.
Right. And this is where, well, it might get tricky.
Especially for, our audience.
Yeah, exactly. Because Riker, she argues that a female supreme world requires us to totally reimagine what it means to be a man.
Okay, so we're not just talking about men being a little more sensitive.
No, she's suggesting a much bigger shift
Okay, I'm all ears.
away from those traditional masculine traits. The ones associated with dominance and aggression,
Got it.
and towards qualities like caregiving, empathy, vulnerability.
So it's a pretty radical shift in perspective.
It is.
I mean, where does that leave men in this new world order?
That's the question, right? Like, does masculinity become obsolete?
Right.
Riker doesn't think so.
Okay.
She believes that there are these positive aspects of masculinity that we can preserve
That's interesting.
and even enhance in a society that prioritizes, female leadership.
But it requires us to take a hard look at those traditional gender roles.
Right, and be willing to let go of the ones that are harmful.
The ones that are holding us back.
Exactly. So it's about moving beyond these rigid definitions.
Yeah, of what's masculine or feminine.
And embracing the full spectrum of human qualities.
Allowing both men and women to express themselves more fully.
Yeah, exactly. Without being constrained by these outdated notions.
It's a whole new way of looking at things.
And this ties into her exploration of the feminine divine, which I know might sound a little out there.
Yeah, I can see how some people might react to that.
But it's a really fascinating concept.
Okay, I'm open to hearing more.
So Riker, she sees the feminine divine as this powerful force that's been, well, suppressed by patriarchal societies for centuries.
And she's arguing that reconnecting with this energy is essential.
Essential for dismantling those oppressive structures.
I see. So it's not about pushing a specific religion or anything.
No, not at all.
It's more about recognizing the ways in which feminine energy has been devalued.
Right.
And marginalized.
And exploring how reclaiming that energy can lead to a more balanced, harmonious society.
Okay, that makes sense.
Think about those qualities that are often associated with,
the feminine.
Yeah, intuition, nurturing, creativity.
Right.
A connection to nature.
Those are often seen as, well,
soft skills.
Yeah, but Riker's arguing that they're essential for creating a more just, sustainable world.
Exactly. It's like she's saying, look, we've been trying to do things the patriarchal way for so long, and it's not working.
Yeah, like it's time for a different approach.
It's time to tap into that feminine wisdom, that intuitive knowing.
Right, that's been pushed aside for far too long.
Oh, yeah. And she gives these really compelling examples of how this feminine energy has played out in history.
Like what?
She talks about Mary Wollstonecraft, who advocated for women's rights way back in the 18th century.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The Bronte sisters challenging those societal norms through their novels.
Right, powerful women using their voices.
And then, of course, modern-day figures like Margaret Atwood.
Oh, yeah, her work is amazing.
It's a reminder that women have always been at the forefront of social change.
Yeah, even when their voices have been silenced or overlooked.
And Riker wants to reclaim that power, not just for women, but for all of us.
Right, it's about the collective good.
And she connects this to women's ability to create. Remember that whole chapter about the womb of the world?
Yeah, I do.
She draws this parallel between biological creation and the birthing of new ideas, innovations, social movements.
So women are not just capable of creating life, they're capable of creating a better world.
That's exactly her point.
That's powerful.
Yeah, it really is a powerful image, and one that kind of pushes us to rethink creativity.
It does.
But as inspiring as Riker's ideas are, she doesn't shy away from the potential pushback either.
Right, because there's definitely going to be some of that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you hear female supremacy, and you immediately imagine.
Oh, yeah, like this world where men are totally subjugated and women rule with an iron fist.
Exactly. It's easy to jump to that conclusion.
Especially, well,
for this audience.
Yeah, if you're coming from a perspective where it feels like men's rights are already under attack.
It's understandable.
It is, but Riker, she argues that this isn't about just reversing the power dynamic.
No, not at all.
Like creating a mirror image of the patriarchy we're trying to dismantle.
Right. It's not about punishing men for, for
the sins of their fathers.
Exactly.
It's about dismantling the whole system.
A whole system.
That benefits from those old power structures.
And she really addresses this fear of female dominance head on.
Oh, does she?
She does. She says, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's something like, men often assume that if women were in charge, they'd just do to men what men have done to them.
Yeah, like what goes around comes around kind of thing.
Right, which is, well, let's be honest,
a pretty pessimistic view of human nature.
It is. It is.
And Riker, she challenges that.
She does.
She argues that women, they're not inherently vengeful or power hungry.
Right.
She believes that women are actually more inclined toward,
cooperation.
Yeah, compassion.
That holistic approach to leadership.
So it's not about just flipping the script, putting women in charge and expecting them to act exactly like men have.
Right. It's about creating something new.
Something entirely new.
A system that goes beyond those old power dynamics.
I like the sound of that.
And she believes that this requires a fundamental shift in consciousness.
A shift in consciousness. Interesting.
Both for men and women.
Right. We all need to be on board with this.
It's about recognizing that equality benefits everyone.
That a rising tide lifts all boats.
Exactly. That a society where women are empowered is a society where everyone can thrive.
It makes sense.
It does. It does. It's about moving beyond that zero-sum game mentality.
Yeah, the idea that if someone wins, someone else has to lose.
Right. Riker believes we can create a world where everyone wins.
That's a world I want to live in.
Me too, where both men and women are free to just express their full potential.
Without being limited by those, outdated gender roles.
Exactly.
And she sees the embrace of the feminine divine as a key part of this.
Right. Those qualities of nurturing, compassion, intuition.
Yeah, tapping into a different kind of energy, a different way of being.
And this is where her vision starts to really take shape.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
She paints this picture of a future where the feminine is not just valued,
Yeah.
it's celebrated.
Celebrated, that's beautiful.
Where those qualities, often seen as soft or weak.
Right, become the foundation for something better.
For a more just, compassionate, sustainable world.
It's a hopeful vision.
It is.
So how does she see this playing out in the real world?
Well, she envisions a world where leadership is not about dominance and control, but about collaboration and empathy.
Yeah.
Where success is measured by well-being, not by material wealth.
Right, shifting those priorities.
Where power is shared, not hoarded.
It's a different way of thinking about power.
It is. It's a world where men aren't threatened by women's power.
Right, but empowered by it.
Where those differences between men and women are seen as strengths, not weaknesses.
It's a beautiful idea.
It is. And she challenges us to really imagine what this would look like, in concrete terms.
Okay, yeah.
How would we structure our economies? How would we govern ourselves? How would we raise our children?
Big questions.
Big questions, right? And Riker, she doesn't pretend to have all the answers.
Of course not. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right. But she believes that by asking these questions, by having these difficult conversations, we can start to create the future we want.
I love that.
And she ends the book with this really powerful challenge.
Oh, what is it?
She asks, if women were truly in charge, what kind of world would you want to create?
Wow, that's a good one.
It is, isn't it? It forces us to really confront our own assumptions.
Our own desires.
Our own vision for the future.
And I think that's the perfect place to wrap up our deep dive today.
I think so too. This isn't about just blindly accepting everything Riker says.
Right. It's about using her work as a starting point.
As a springboard for our own exploration.
For understanding the complexities of all this.
Of gender, of power, and the potential for change.
Right. And I think that's what's so valuable about this book. It really makes you think.
It does. And I hope this deep dive has given everyone some food for thought.
Me too. It's been a fascinating conversation.
It has. Thanks for joining us.